Moshi Moshi.
Hello.
I'm Zeb Ramsbotham.
And I'm Annie Ramsbotham.
And we're the Rambling Ramsbothams.
Our journey might be rambling, but we hope this podcast isn't.
And you can tell...
still haven't figured out a new intro.
Yeah, didn't figure one out.
I should have not mentioned it last week.
I honestly didn't think about it, but it is something still in my mind that I'm interested in changing, but haven't done anything about it. But yeah, here we are for another episode.
Yeah, and I have a listener email to read to you about tourism in Kanazawa. And so it's from Michelle. She discovered our podcast 2 months ago. Very interesting. Your comments are so helpful, which is very nice to hear. I traveled to Kanazawa last year. I liked it very much and decided to come back this year. My new trip starts this Sunday and I'll be in Kanazawa on the 18th. Somehow it feels odd to be a tourist in an area where a lot of people are suffering from the quake hardship. Would you know if there are any major difficulties in staying in the city? And I thought that was a nice email because you always want to be cognizant as a tourist of the area. But it's also interesting because so much of Kanazawa is so back to normal. And so that's what I told her, that it's a good question. I think it's perfectly fine to come to Kanazawa as a tourist because this area wasn't affected nearly as much as things up in the Noto Peninsula. So I don't think there's really any reason for this area to continue to lose money, like tourism money, in that regard. Of course, I wouldn't go north. I wouldn't go up into the Noto Peninsula. That's what the government has said, not to go up that way, just because they are still doing pretty intensive repairs and rescues in some instances. But, in the city, I don't think there's any major difficulties at all. Like, the hotels, restaurants, transportation is all back to normal. So that's what I told her. I will link some info on one of the tourism sites for our prefecture, which it covers all parts of the prefecture, but they do tend to post mostly about Kanazawa. And yeah, everything in Kanazawa and south in Kaga is open as usual. So
yeah, I think if you go any north of like Subata or kind of that town, which is a little bit north of Kanazawa, like then you can start seeing like bigger damage. But yeah, like Kanazawa and south of Kanazawa, yeah, and it really does feel really normal here. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like, it might be like a weird juxtaposition thing, especially if you visit after you've been like looking at the news and just kind of seeing like news stories about this region. When you come, you'll probably be like really surprised that you really, like in Kanazawa, maybe in some areas you might see some like really minor damage, but you'll probably be like a little maybe confused about like, oh, I thought there was like a huge earthquake here.
Yeah, and there was, but it was a couple hours away, and that kind of small distance makes all the difference. So people in Noto are going through it still and having a difficult time. And I do feel badly for them, but I guess my thought is like, if you spend money in the prefecture, then it can maybe benefit everybody in the prefecture. Hopefully, hopefully,
we don't know how their taxes work here, but
hopefully the money is going to those rescue efforts. And of course, you can always donate directly to the rescue efforts. But I did tell Michelle that you should be ready for possible aftershocks that always happens after an earthquake, which was news to me coming from a country or an area in a country that doesn't get earthquakes. I didn't know that after the initial one, they just keep happening, significantly smaller. But
yeah, we haven't had like a big aftershock in like quite a while now. Like
probably
maybe even almost, well, no, I would say almost like a day. Like there have been no alerts on my phone about any like earthquakes, even in the Noto region, which I know like usually it only alerts you if it's like a 3 or above. So there probably been maybe smaller earthquakes below that. But we haven't felt one in a while, and there hasn't been an alert on my phone in probably like a day or two. So yeah, it's like now there are less chances of aftershocks. So yeah,
which is good. Hopefully things can get back to normal for farther up north too. And yeah, just like an aside about not glorifying tragedy, we've been trying to talk about the earthquake in like neutral or just realistic terms based on like what was true for us and things, because I haven't seen them as much, but I was initially seeing a bunch of kind of clickbaity titles on YouTube and social media about people who were like, I'm fine, but ... And then I would click and be like, oh, I didn't know they were like in this area too. Like, I hope they weren't up in the epicenter, and then they'd be like, I'm in Tokyo, but I'm fine. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Or they'd be like, I was in Noto in 2022.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you were there 2.5 years ago. Like,
yeah.
So we're pretty like cognizant of being.
Well, we're trying to be. It's hard to know because I don't know if we should just keep talking about the earthquake and keep dwelling on it, but I also don't want to like gloss over something that was so disruptive and damaging for so many people and then be like, okay, well, we're fine, so now what?
And it is interesting because it was like a super significant event in this region, so it is kind of like, I don't know, like really big in the news and kind of in the culture like right now, and it is where we live, so it's hard not to talk about, so we will talk about it like a little bit more, but maybe after this episode we'll, it's not that it will never be relevant, but after this episode, we'll try and kind of shift the focus to other things. And even in this episode, we'll talk about happier things towards the end. But since it is still so relevant, we did want to talk about a little bit of like current news that is happening with the earthquake.
Yeah, and it's affected students in a way that I didn't really think about. But this month, there's the university exams were happening.
Yeah, so they're actually last weekend. So right now it's January 15th. But January 13th and 14th were the standardized university entrance exams. And I think we've mentioned this before, and I'm sorry, but I don't know in the rest of the world what your university exams are like. But in the United States, we have these things called the SATs.
Or the ACTs.
Or the ACTs, but no one really looks at those. Those are for those weird private school kids.
I took both to see if I could get a higher score in one or the other.
The SAT is, I think, more normal.
I think so,
unless it's changed. Because I only took the SAT. But I was a public school kid, so I had it rough. But so anyway, it's kind of like that where you go and for, except in America, it's just one day. You do a standardized test and you get this score. And then that's what universities look at, along with some other material to accept you. So in Japan, they have a standardized university entrance exam where the whole country takes the exam on the same weekend. So on the 13th, they tested social studies, Japanese language, and foreign language. And then on the 14th, they tested science and math. And I'm still not 100% sure how this works, but I think you actually say which university you're trying to test to get into, and then your scores get sent there. So I think you have to like pick your university.
That's so much pressure.
I know, I'm pretty sure. And this news article talked about that this is like widely in Japanese culture seen as this thing where like your future hinges on this event.
Because the SAT in America, it is only one day of testing, but you can take it as many times as you want over like a multiple week period.
Yeah.
Like you could just
kind
keep
of a long time. Like I think
it.
a year before you apply. Yeah. Like you can take the SAT like 6 times.
This is like 2 days of the entire year. Like that's it. Yeah. What if you're sick?
Well, so that's why this was like a really big deal because the earthquake was so recently. So a lot of high schoolers were coming off of winter break and then they were kind of doing their final preparations for this huge test. And this is just like anecdotal, but 45.2% of eligible high school students take it. And this year it's 492,000 students.
That's actually way lower than I thought.
I know, right? So this is the first year since the first year in 32 years that it's been below 500,000. So people are kind of freaking out. But it's this big deal. And so students are coming out of winter break and they're going to take the test. And it's, like very important life event. And of course, some students, like they don't have schools anymore. So
like in the Noto area.
Yeah, so in the Noto area, there are 13 cities/towns which have had to postpone the reopening of school. And only 4 of those municipalities have plans to reopen at all because the schools were so damaged. So one of them was actually in Toyama, and then the other 12 are in Noto Ishikawa.
Which is the prefecture that's next to us.
Yeah, so the Prefectural Board of Education is kind of like scrambling to figure out what to do. The good news is that anyone that was eligible to take the test this past weekend was able to take it. And then also they're setting up a kind of like makeup test on the 27th and 28th. So
that's nice.
2 weeks from now, they'll host another exam for kids affected in Noto.
I wonder if you can take both.
I think so. That's kind of the idea that I got, that like you were able to take this one, but then also there would be a second test. So that's really nice, but that doesn't really like prevent the fact, or like, fix the problem that they still don't have a school to go to. So now I guess it's nice because now they have like more time to kind of calm down and adjust to the post-earthquake life. But there were some like interesting quotes and stuff in the article talking about how like parents and students and the Board of Education are scrambling to find new schools to go to.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So, and even at my school, for example, they pushed back the date of just the end of the year exam because they were worried about like kids being affected by the earthquake. And I guess more of like a psychological way, which at least one kid at my school does live in the area of Uchinata that was like kind of really hard hit. And so he hasn't been back at school yet. I think he's like physically safe, but his house I think was a little messed up.
And then you can't really mentally be in a good headspace to pay attention in school or take a test.
Yeah.
It's a really big deal.
Yeah, so people talk about that like with cram schools and like it's hard to study right now, and even just like physically, because some kids were like, well, I had some of my like learning material at school and they're not allowed to go back into the building because the earthquake. So yeah.
I didn't think about that.
Specifically.
Because it happened on a holiday, so all their books and stuff probably weren't at their house with them. Yeah.
So particularly in Nanao, I read an article that there is a school where it's like 192 seniors were planning to take this exam, and then their school was like destroyed by the earthquake. So it's a really big deal. So it is really nice that there's going to be some leniency and allow them to take it another week. But this is kind of like, in addition to that, it's really interesting that there was an article about a mass evacuation of 250 junior high school students from 3 schools in Wajima. And it's a mass evacuation because they've still been living in Wajima, kind of in shelters, but they're evacuating as one like unit. So 250 students are going to go down to Hakusan, which is kind of like in Kaga, so south of Kanazawa. And they're going to go down there as like one school unit, and essentially like the teachers are going with them.
Like boarding school kind of? Like sudden boarding school?
Yeah, like they're all just like moving.
I hope the living conditions are okay, because just to live at a school that's not set up for housing. Yeah, I guess that's what they're doing anyway with shelters right now, where you're just living in a gym, like a gymnasium.
In a gym, and this is like a side note, I hadn't like written about it, but there are even shelters that are, there's like vinyl greenhouses where people are living in those. Yeah, this has been a really big issue in the news, that a lot of the shelters are really bad. And recently there have been like health issues because there's not running water and good sanitation.
And it's freezing right now.
It's freezing, and so it's flu season also, so they're worried about flu and like other like viruses. So it's been a big deal. And so yeah, it is interesting that 150 students declined to go. So I don't know what happens with them, because they don't want to leave, so they'll stay, but they can't continue school because their schools can't open. And I guess this is also
such a hard choice. Like, me as a junior high school student, do I want to like leave my family and go live in a school somewhere? No, probably not.
That you've probably never been.
Yeah.
And this is also why it's really interesting to me as a teacher, because I've seen like firsthand how schools work in Japan. And it's fascinating that in Japan, classes are run by homeroom. So even in high school, and essentially what that means is the students do classes as a unit, and they stay in a room and the teacher comes to them. That does change for some like science classes, and there are some kind of like extracurricular classes where maybe some students are on a slightly different level. They'll go to a different room and a teacher will meet them there. But for the most part, students stay in their class and then the teacher comes to them. And so it really is this kind of like core community, like this unit of kids that do everything together. So all of their learning and kind of like even athletics. And so it's like a really big deal to move schools and then to reintegrate. So it is really nice that these kids from Wajima are able to move as a unit, but I feel bad for the kids that are like kind of getting like left behind or not going. And then also for other students, like I was told that potentially at my school we'll get students from Noto. And so it's really like, it's a really big shock to like your social life, because you've probably been in school with the same kids, especially in junior high, for a really long time. And then you've kind of had this core group that you've like gone through the years with. And then all of a sudden you get introduced to a new social circle in an entirely new place. To me,
I
it
hadn't
seems
thought
like a
about
slightly
that.
bigger deal than just transferring schools in the United States. Because in the U.S., like in my school, we had a home room, but we didn't do everything together. Like we literally just met in the morning, and then we all, like, some of those kids I never even saw again. Like I would only see them in homeroom, and I never had class with them.
And you would have different students in your room based on the different subject you were taking?
Yeah, so we went to the room instead of the teacher coming to us. So we like dispersed. And so
I did that also, but my high school was so small
Yeah.
that we pretty much just all took the same classes.
Yeah, like in a bigger school, yeah, it's just very different.
Yeah.
So
I
it's
hadn't thought
definitely
about
like
that. And also
pretty-
schools are such large buildings and such like important things in society that I didn't even really think that they would get destroyed. I kind of thought like, oh, if something's in danger, like everybody go to the school, you know?
Wait, which is, it is like,
They're evacuation centers for a lot of things.
Yeah. So like we won't post any pictures on our Instagram or anything, but we can post a link to the Asahi, which is the newspaper I read, and they have a section on their website called the National Report, and there's some pretty wild photos. Even a school in Kanazawa, like it was on a hillside, and essentially the back half of the school just kind of like fell away.
I'm so glad no one was there. You know, like that
Yeah,
it
it's
was a
really good as the
holiday.
holidays because it happened like kind of at a prime time when classes are over, but extracurriculars were still happening. So, but yeah, it's just really interesting to read about kind of what's happening with these students and kind of as a teacher in the region, like maybe we'll get
And maybe you'll
to
get
like,
new students.
yeah, some of those new students.
Hopefully it'll be smoother, or I don't know. That's a crazy situation to be in.
Yeah, and one of my coworkers were telling me that he said that in Ushinada there are actually like a lot of people whose like maybe their home place is in Noto, but they live in Uchinada.
Oh.
That I don't know why he thinks this, but he was saying that he thinks like when a lot of younger people moved out of the Noto region, then they moved south, they came to Uchinada.
So maybe they were up in Noto visiting family for New Year's, but they
Maybe, but
live
I
down
think he
here.
was saying that's why he thinks more students might come here because there might be more people here that are familiar with like Wajima and Noto. I don't know if maybe there was like a news story in the
That's
local
interesting.
paper about this. But he was telling me that. So it was, yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, and our town made it in the news too, the national news.
Our town was also in the national news. And this was unfortunately for bad reasons, because the area that was super damaged by the earthquake, which apparently they said it was due to liquefaction, and I'm no expert.
Not liquefaction?
Is it liquefaction?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know the
I don't know either.
technical term.
Yeah.
But it's when sand and water in the soil separate.
Yeah, due to vibrations. So it happens like in wet areas with sandy soil. And essentially that's what happened on that one road in that area in Uchinada. And so there's like a newspaper article about it with some pretty wild photos of the road.
We saw it on our bike ride. It was our first, we've now been on our first bike ride since, actually our only outdoor bike ride since the new year began.
Yeah.
Because for so long we were worried with the earthquake. And then now I don't feel bad about the earthquake, but now it's like snowy. But anyway, we went on a ride, and I mean, it's probably a 10-minute ride from our house.
I'd say you could probably get there, in 5 to 10 minutes.
It's in the same town, but it's on a different part of kind of this big paved over sand dune that we live on right now. And it's wild because it's just so, they were so much more affected than anywhere else on this town.
Yeah. It's like the road used to be like a flat, kind of straight road, but now it's off camber and then like really
like at an
lumpy and
angle.
wavy. Yeah. So it's,
And in some places, the road is higher by like a full meter.
yeah, it's like 3 feet.
And yeah, and so the road is touching the top of the guardrail where like
Yeah.
it should be
Yeah.
way below it. And then it also is sad because there will be some houses that are fine, and then some houses that are across the street that you're not allowed to go into anymore because they're so damaged that they're high risk.
Yeah, so this is where we learned that there is a crew that I guess where there's been obvious damage and you can tell that things aren't going to be good. There's a crew that goes around and they will like paste a colored letter to the front door
Like
of the
a
building.
huge poster.
Yeah, and it says if it's green, it's safe, so you're allowed to go in.
It
If
says
it's-
inspected on it.
Yeah. If it's yellow, it means limited entry. I don't know how long, but you're able to go in for a little bit.
Like to get things from the
Yeah.
house and come back out, but like you're not supposed to stay in the house.
Yeah. And then red is just like unsafe. Like you're not supposed to go in there. So there is a crew that will come around and inspect the building if it's been damaged. So in Uchinada, on that one area, this is also where I learned that there are like emergency funds from the government that will go to help repair and rebuild homes if the houses have been condemned due to damage. And in Uchinada alone, 837 applications have been submitted to get that funding. And then there's also a government fund to repair the land in cases where 10 or more houses in a 3,000 square meter area has been impacted by this phenomenon.
Which I bet that street qualifies, because the whole street was just like, it was crazy. I mean, the ground was just like, it was like if you would take a picnic blanket and like shook it. Yeah. Everything was just so wavy.
Especially rough, and I do feel bad. So there was like some interesting quotes in the article from like some elderly residents that feel like forgotten by the nation because they're like, the damage here is kind of just as bad as it was in Noto. Like our houses are destroyed, but no one cares. At least that's how he felt. And then it was also really interesting to read, some people, like, these government funds that you get access to are to rebuild or repair your home or fix the land. But there were some people that were like, I never want to live here again. They were like, I guess from being in it, they were describing the way their house was moving. They're like, I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
But so then, do you get access to any kind of funding to help you move?
Interesting. I wonder if some of the places in Toyama Prefecture felt that way, or like surrounding areas, because the news has been all about Noto, and justifiably. I mean, they should be getting a lot of attention, but there are places that also need attention that you don't hear anything about, which
I think
is interesting.
It's interesting because the damage in other areas was just as great, but the toll on life was not as high.
Yeah,
so specifically in Noto, more people died, and no one, as far as I could tell, no one died actually in Uchinada. Yeah. Their houses were just destroyed.
There also was like, they could go to a grocery store here. Like, of course it's terrible to have your house destroyed, but they had access to a hospital and water and things. And in Noto, unfortunately, a lot of people were stranded and couldn't access like essential life things.
Yeah. And then, because this article even mentioned that I think somewhere in Niigata had this same issue where like the ground, because the way the ground was, there was this crazy damage, even though they were so far away.
Natural disasters are terrifying.
Especially earthquakes.
Yeah, they don't.
Super weird.
You can't predict them, and they don't care about like class or status. Like, it's not like a preventable thing. I guess in some ways, if you have a higher income, you could just like move.
You can afford to go stay in a hotel.
I felt really lucky that we could just go to a hotel.
Yeah. So thinking of, and this is like kind of my final note, I think, about the earthquake. Thinking about, you were talking about how there are some communities that are so isolated. So I think that's one of the reasons that Noto is so high ranking. And we've even been told before that, there are films that are filmed in Noto because it has this idea of, it feels like old Japan. And it feels like this isolated, like remote, little peninsula.
It has all the old wooden buildings still.
Yeah, and it is still, to a certain extent, it does kind of have that vibe. And this number has gone down, which is super good. So when I was first reading this article, it talked about 34,000 evacuees and then 2,300 people in 22 communities. That has now dropped to 19,000 evacuees and 490 people in 15 communities. But the issue is that, so those 19,000 evacuees are still in Noto and still living in shelters, and they've been like moving them out of Noto and bringing them down to like Kanazawa and surrounding areas. The issue is those 490 people in the 15 communities are especially at risk because they're people that are actually like cut off. Like, their roads are so destroyed that they're like in their communities, and there's not an easy way to get them out. So that's become like a big issue in Noto. So thankfully, like, it's dropped by a significant margin of people.
And are those 490 people, like, can we not just helicopter them out?
I think that's what they're like. I mean, because at some point that number used to be 2,300. Okay. So somehow they've been.
There have been helicopters every day.
A lot.
And my friend told me that each of these helicopters can fit 30 people, which is a lot. But if there's thousands of people, that's a lot of helicopter runs.
Yeah. And it sounds like from this news article, it's gotten to the point. And right now, Prime Minister Kishida is in Noto,
really?
shaking hands and worrying about viruses, according to one news article. But it's now, I think, come down to a point that maybe those 490 people are like the people that don't want to leave.
It's like a whole other thing to consider.
Yeah, because those are like their communities, and that's where they're from, and they don't want to leave. And so it's kind of like the prime minister and the governor of Ishikawa has kind of sent out this request, and it kind of sounds like it's basically a demand, but they've been requesting that everyone evacuate to a place where they can have power, water, and proper care, because many of these people are super elderly. They're like really old people, and so they need a lot. But many of them are reluctant to leave, and they don't want to leave even though their houses are
They might feel guilty about leaving. Like they might be like, well, I don't want to leave until everybody else, and I
don't know. But then it's like their houses are borderline unlivable.
It's hard because so you have a coworker, and I guess this time last week you didn't know if your coworker was okay.
Yeah, so I was going to talk about this. Yeah, so this is kind of a good transition that I got to see my coworker on Tuesday night, and she is good.
Yeah, what a
thankfully.
relief.
Yeah, it was wild because we just sat down for like 35 minutes and like talked because we didn't have a class that night. It was the opening ceremony, and so we just chatted. And yeah, it was really interesting to talk to her because she is from a small community in Wajima. And so she was like right there at the epicenter, and she was up there for 5 days before they could leave. And it was just fascinating talking to her because she was up there with her parents. And this is where it's, like interesting because her mom is, I think she said 75, but she's the youngest person in their community because the other people in the community are like 90s. And so her mom feels like she can't leave because she's the young one that takes care of everybody. She needs to take care of
the neighbors.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a hard situation.
Yeah.
Because she's like, well, I don't want to leave. Like, we need to get everybody else out. Or like, yeah.
And then it was really interesting too because she said that they didn't know how bad things were. Like, she said that obviously when the earthquake happened, she said she can't describe it. She said it was like...
It was so scary.
Yeah, it was so bad. And she's like, but we didn't know how bad the destruction was for 5 days until they made it to Kanazawa.
Because they didn't have power to see the news?
And then they actually got to see the news.
Cell phones?
They died.
Oh, because they couldn't charge the cell phones.
Yeah. So her cell phone had died, so she was like up there for 5 days. And she said they did have like a little radio, but I guess on the radio they're only giving out, like where to go and kind of like helpful stuff. They're not talking about how bad the destruction was.
That's good, actually. Like, why? Like, you don't need to fuel panic on the radio if you're trying to listen for like what you should do.
Yeah. So she said for 5 days they didn't know. They made it to Kanazawa. She was able to convince her parents to leave, and then they were down here for like 4 or 5 days.
The craziest thing when you were telling me this is that they also didn't have heat because they didn't have power, and they had an oil-based heater, but they didn't want to use it because the aftershocks are so unpredictable and were so large that they didn't, if that fell over, it would cause a fire. So they turned it off because they were so scared.
She told me that there was one room in the house that felt safe enough to be in. So they were all just sharing the same room. They also don't have like running water or anything. And she said that, one morning they used the oil heater, but then they decided it was too dangerous. So they cut it off.
I'm really glad she lives in Kanazawa and she's back and she's safe, and her parents are with her. And so
except she went back this past weekend because
her
mom was like convinced that she needed to go up there and like check on the neighbors and check on their house,
which the government is actively telling people not to do. But it's hard because if your entire life is up there, and I guess this 75-year-old lady is like, well, I'm gonna go check on the people I love. That's hard to argue with. I guess.
Yeah, so they made it down and they were here for a while, and so she was telling me that she was really hoping she can convince her parents, like, just stay here, like, don't go back. But she convinced her mom, at least, I think they decided they were going to drive up on Saturday morning, check on the house, and then come back on Sunday. So I'll get to see her tomorrow night, and hopefully she's doing well.
Hopefully they're all back.
But yeah, it was like crazy talking to her.
Especially because that's not that far away, and just to think about the difference in impact, between... Like, what we had was really just a good scare.
And she said that she mentioned that to me, that was wild, because she said she came down here and it was like everything was normal.
Yeah.
It was like coming out of the wilderness, and then all of a sudden they were in Kanazawa again, and it was like everyone was living this like super normal life.
I can't imagine how different that would have been.
Yeah, and also how do you like relate to people at that point?
People are like, I was scared, and you're like, I was literally terrified.
That's where I felt so bad for her, because after the opening ceremony, the job was, instead of having class, they were going to have check-in with the students. And
which is nice. I mean, they should
but I was
check
like, someone needs to check in with her.
Yeah, they should.
Like, the students are fine. They were down here, and Kanazawa, the student that we had, said that he didn't even feel it.
Oh, well, that's surprising.
He was on vacation in Kobe.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah, so he was
here.
like, I was in, like, down there. And I was
but
like,
it is a nice thought to check in with students. I mean, because it is scary. But yeah, someone should also check in with the teachers.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I felt so bad for her because, yeah, she's a very nice lady, and she's so small. She's like the classic, like, Japanese, like, she's just this tiny lady. So, yeah, I just felt, yeah, it had to be terrifying.
I'm glad she's safe, and, yeah, and her family's safe.
Yeah.
So.
But this was, like, an interesting point in one of the articles that the 6-year-old man said that he thinks everyone in Japan needs to ponder what happens when natural disasters occur in rural areas with a decreasing number of young people. Which kind of like
Don't
when
you think they are pondering that? I mean, Japan's kind of freaking out about how they don't have young people everywhere.
I think so, but I think that they're thinking about it more like, if you think about, and it's not the case with a lot of earthquakes, like they affect like wide-ranging areas, but this one was predominantly in a very rural area that really is mostly old people. Mm-hmm. And so I think he was saying it from the point of like, how do we rebuild? Mm-hmm. Because when you rebuild in like a city, you're rebuilding like there's so many young people there to help re-energize everything.
Yeah.
And he was like, up here, like the community that got wiped out was already.
That'd be so like feudal feeling. Just
I think that was his point.
Should we
that he was 60, but he was like in his community. It was the same thing. Like I think his dad died in the earthquake, but his dad was 85.
Oh.
And so he was like, there's no one really to
stay here for.
Yeah, so I think it was like rough.
That's
and
an interesting
like, and then when you
sad.
Evacuate people,
yeah,
you take them out, and so maybe they spend like a year or two down here, and then what? Do they go back? But who rebuilds the houses? I don't know.
That's an interesting like philosophical question. Like I would have to talk to somebody who's had experience with like, I'm sure that's a job, just city planning after natural disasters.
Yeah, because that's how I feel like with my like coworker. It just made me think about her when I was reading that. Because if her mom is 75 and she's the young one in their community, what do you do?
I feel like Japan has that fear anyway. Like besides like natural disasters just speed it up, but yeah.
It's rough.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
Yeah. Well, we can move on to some
more happier topics.
Yeah, some happier topics.
Yeah. If anyone has anything to add about any of that, definitely email us and give us your perspective. But I wanted to talk more about some holiday, I guess they're not holiday things, but some seasonal things that are happening.
Yeah, because we kind of missed the New Year's, which is kind of Japan's biggest holiday.
We talked about New Year's, but there's some other things that continue happening in January. And one of them happened on January 11th, the kagami biraki, which is literally means opening the mirror. But it refers to the 2 rice cakes that you might see in pictures of New Year's celebrations that are stacked on top of each other with like an orange on the top. Those are kagami mochi that are prepared for the New Year, the rice cakes. And so usually it falls on January 11th because that's a good luck number in Japan. But that's the day that the kagami mochi can be broken and eaten. And you break it with a hammer or by hand. You don't want to like cut into it with a knife apparently. And you can you could just eat them, but a lot of times they'll be put in a sweet red bean soup. Or you could eat them as zinzai, ozoni, but I didn't know this. I mean, I'm not Japanese, but I bought the kagami mochi for New Year's because I was like,
I think we ate ours like.
We ate it like on the day.
New Year's. Yeah, I think we ate it like the morning of the earthquake.
Oh no, because I was
a bit of a curse.
Yeah, because when I was reading this, it says, however, eating the rice cake earlier can anger the kami-sama, like can anger the gods.
Those gaijin didn't know.
I didn't know.
Well, now we know.
Yeah, so you shouldn't eat your mirror rice cakes before the 11th, the lucky day. Oops. And then that also, kagami biraki can also refer to the ceremonial opening of a sake cask. So you might hear it in that context too, like for like a wedding maybe or something. You hammer it open with a wooden mallet. But that's fun. We'll make a note of that for next January 11th, so I don't eat it prematurely again.
Yeah.
But something that happened today, or it happens around this time, but around January 15th, towns might have dondoyaki, which is the ceremonial burning of New Year's decor. So you might be thinking, I guess we didn't think of this because we didn't buy any non-edible New Year's decor.
We did last year, but I think we just threw it away.
I think we did. Which is, the reason you have this is because you're not supposed to just throw it away, because that would be blasphemous.
Well, we don't know what we're doing.
And you're also not supposed to reuse decor because I guess you want something like new and fresh.
Yeah, that was like an interesting point to me, because I assumed that the things that they hang out were kind of like, I just assumed it was kind of like how we have
family
Christmas
heirlooms.
Decor at home, and like you put it out.
Reuse ornaments.
Yeah, then you take it down. I didn't know it was you put it out and then you burn it.
Yeah, so the things that you hang on the door that we talked about last week, and we've talked before, but the shimekazari, like the holy ropes, and I guess they're not holy, but you know, the sacred ropes, or the pine, or the 3 layers, like the 3 tiers of bamboo, you know.
Yeah, and also I guess the
all of those different
persimmons, dried persimmons.
Yeah, all of those different decor that have different meanings and different purposes for New Year's. You should take them to a shrine or to your town's dondoyaki, and then they'll be ceremonially burned, which is a nice thought that also we didn't know.
Yeah.
So us heathens, I think we just threw away our persimmons, which is actually better than I almost tried to eat them, because when I saw them they were in the grocery store next to other real persimmons that you eat, and these were persimmons on a stick, and I was like, oh, great, persimmons. So I bought them, and then when I brought them home, I was like, these are really hard persimmons.
I remember.
And then I Googled it, and I was like, oh, I just bought decor, and then I tried to eat the decor. So anyway, don't do that.
You wonder why people look at us like we're aliens sometimes.
Well, yeah. So while we're on the topic of decorating, I mean, we're well past decorating for New Year's, but did you know that there's proper days to decorate?
I didn't until I read this.
Yeah. So December 28th is a good day for decorating.
Of course.
In Japan, 8 is a lucky number, because the kanji for 8, you'll have to look up an image of this, but it looks... This quote is saying that it looks like the future is expanding, but the kanji kind of looks like an arch. The kanji for the number 8. But I guess that's good luck. December 29th is not a good day, because 9 is associated with the kanji ku. I mean, it's pronounced ku, but then the kanji ku means suffering. A different kanji, same pronunciation. So the 29th, not a good day. The 30th, 30 is a nice round number, so it's a good day to decorate.
Of course.
If you miss the 28th and the 30th, the only day you have left is the 31st, which is the day before New Year's, and that's not a good day because it looks like you kind of forgot or you put it off, and it's called overnight decorations, and it's considered rude to the gods.
Yeah, because you're rushing to welcome them.
You don't want to welcome them suddenly.
To a disheveled home.
Yeah, just real quick on the night before.
So if you miss it on the 30th, is it best to just not decorate?
I mean, I guess you would aim for the 28th, and if you miss the 28th, you can do it on the 30th, but you better not.
If you miss the 30th, you just don't?
I mean, I guess you would. You would just have bad luck.
Yeah, just anger the gods anyway.
But I feel like you wouldn't, because this is the biggest holiday of the year.
Yeah, I just didn't know if a rushed decorating is better than no decorating, or if they're just
true.
like, you shouldn't even, why would you even bother?
I don't know. Yeah. There's a lot of lucky and unlucky things with numbers.
Yeah, they're
Japan.
big on numbers. Mm-hmm. I think way more so than the United States.
Yeah.
Like culturally back home, we really only had, you had a lucky clover, and then we had, because it had 4, and then we had unlucky 13. And 7s, I guess, are kind of lucky.
But they're not nearly as talked about. Like sometimes you'll talk about like, oh, unlucky 13, but like when you turn 13, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Like sweet 16, sometimes people say that. I mean, my family, we don't have like quinceañeras for 15th, but
in Japan,
yeah, you have tons of lucky ages. So we already talked about 7, 5, and 3 being ages that you go visit the shrine as a kid. And then the coming of age year when you're 20 we talked about. But I learned that there's special ages for adults, and I was talking specifically with my friends about turning 60. And 60 is called kanreki, and it's the full cycle of the zodiac 5 times, I guess. And so it's celebrated as a rebirth or a re-entry. And so Kan is return and Reki is calendar. And so it's like you're reborn. And so 60 is a special year. It also used to be maybe more important because people could retire earlier. And so 60 was...
Or just maybe back then it was like a miracle you made it to 60.
Maybe.
It was like, dang. He is old.
Maybe. I read in this article that people could mark this by wearing a red hat and a vest. And the red outfit is because red is a celebratory color, but it's also a reference to childhood because babies are called akachan, like literally little red thing, like little red one.
Which is really funny.
Yeah. So I don't know if anybody, because when I was talking to my friends about this, they didn't seem they're turning 60 and they didn't seem like they were getting ready to put on some red clothes, but I thought that was kind of interesting. And also it's symbolic because this is the age when you pass your responsibility onto your family members. So like if you have kids, you're passing them to the next generation. So I guess you're kind of like, all right, well, I'm 60, so all the family responsibilities are now yours.
That's probably why your parents or why your friends aren't like very invested in this, because they're both still like really hardworking women.
Yeah.
they're like, I can't leave this family to them. Like,
maybe.
My kids, they can't do it.
And I also read in this other article that as a symbol of this, sometimes the mother will pass a rice paddle to the wife of their eldest son. And so that makes that couple the new official managers of the family because they now have the family rice paddle.
That's interesting, because what if you had a daughter that's older than your eldest son?
Guess you would just give it to your daughter?
Because I'd be like, I want the rice paddle.
Too bad.
Don't give it to my little brother's wife.
No, I think... Oh,
give it to me.
I see.
Yeah.
Like if you had an older daughter and then you had a son, like do you give it to the older son?
Yeah, do you give it to the eldest son, like daughter? Like
I don't know.
Oldest
I'm sure
child?
It's up to interpretation at this point.
But it's really interesting because this does seem... I was like on board with it until you mentioned the idea of like handing off the family, because that does seem a little antiquated.
Well...
Because it seems like...
I'm sure
even
it's just symbolic.
Historically, it seems like, the elders always ran the family, especially if you think about like politics and stuff like that.
From the articles I was reading, it seemed like you were handing off the unpleasant parts. Like, okay, you have to pay the taxes now, and you have to take care of like the car insurance, like that kind of like stuff. And then it was like,
an adult now.
I'll still be the one that gives the advice and makes the decisions, but I don't know.
Okay.
It seemed more kind of like, you're in your golden years now, like you don't have to worry about anything anymore.
That'd be nice.
Which seems fun.
Maybe that's why they're so worried about the birth rate in Japan, because they're like, it's
who
my
will
golden
I hand
years.
the rice paddle to?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's already a little like tarnished because the retirement age is higher, so it's less of a like, you've made it to retirement, you've just made it to your 60th now, and maybe you can retire if you've done well.
Yeah, well, those are our good years.
Yeah.
What do we have to watch out for?
You have to watch out for the yakudoshi, the calamitous years.
I don't like that.
Yeah, and I didn't know that your calamitous years depend on if you're male or female,
which is so funny, because why would they be different?
I don't know.
But, oh well.
So the ages that are most often considered unlucky in Japan for men are 25, 42, and 61. And then for women, 19, 33, and 37.
I think it was 25 when I met you.
Much regional variation. I don't know. Was that a good or bad thing?
Look at us now.
Yeah.
It's calamitous.
So, yeah, when you're 42 and you're a man and you're 33 and a woman, those are the Dayakudoshi, or the great calamity years. And I don't know, there's, I'm sure, lots of reasons and kind of folktale type things, because nothing really happens other than, like, my friends were saying, like, oh, maybe you'll dress up in a suit and go to the shrine, like give a really big prayer that year, but it's not really
clap
like
really loud.
Yeah. But like, for example, the number 33 is can be pronounced sanzan, and so that can mean like troublesome or like birth difficulty. And then 42 can be pronounced shini, like to death or...
Yeah, I just think that's why it's interesting, because if it can be pronounced as like death, or it can be interpreted as death, like, well, it's the same 42 as when a woman turns 42.
Yeah,
so
why does
only the man get the bad...
I don't know.
The bad 42.
It's a good question. So...
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
So my next one will be when I turn 42.
Yeah, my next will be when
years.
I turn 33, so...
Yeah, you're
we
just
have
coming up
both
soon.
of our great it's not that soon. We both have our great calamity
You're like,
years
I'm still
coming.
young.
Yeah, I'm young and fun.
Yeah.
I'm hip.
Yeah, I wonder where we'll be for our great calamity.
I don't know. We'll have to make it back to Japan and...
Clap real loud.
Yeah,
put our
go to a
suits on.
shrine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get our omomoris.
I have one more fun thing to tell you about.
Yeah, let's end it on a fun note before our words of the week.
Okay. So this past week, I got to try soy sauce ice cream.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, Zeb's upset because I didn't bring him. But
yeah, I didn't
he
go.
was at work.
It's only fun for one of us.
I'm sorry.
No, yeah, I had to work, and it's okay. We'll get back.
I didn't have to work during this time, and so I had been talking about soy sauce ice cream for like a year, and my friend was like, "You still haven't gotten it?"
Well, I like how you guys happen to be in the town where the soy sauce ice cream is, and then you mentioned it again, and they were like, "I thought you had already had it."
Yeah,
like,
they were like, "Let's just go do this now."
Yeah, so you just walked over there and got some.
Yeah, which was great. I got it. And if you're thinking about what soy sauce ice cream tastes like, depending on what you're thinking, it's better than you would imagine, I think. Because in my head, soy sauce is such a salty, savory flavor that putting it into something sweet sounds kind of gross. But it's actually like a tangier salted caramel ice cream in my mind.
Which sounds really good, because that's
really
one of my
nice.
favorite ice cream flavors, is a little salted caramel.
It was kind of like miso-y a little bit. I guess soybeans are in both of those things. But in Ono is where we were, which is a little port town. It's like outside of Kanazawa, but I don't know if it's part of the Kanazawa area, but Ono is a little...
I think it's Onomachi. I think it's like its own
town.
Yeah, its own little designated thing. But yeah, it basically like butts into Kanazawa.
Yeah. And so it's a really short... I guess you could take a bus there if you're visiting.
One of the buses that I take to go to the station when I'm done with my night school actually goes all the way out to Ono.
Well, it's really cute out there, and it's right on the water. I mean, like I said, it's a port, but a lot of the buildings are old wooden buildings, and so it does have, like, it has a lot of the same, like, you could take a picture and make it look a little like Noto in some areas.
Yeah.
Like,
it is very pretty.
Yeah,
it's nice.
Yeah, it's kind of old and rustic, and we were there getting lunch at this cafe. It was a cafe, kind of, I guess it was more like a lunch gift shop type thing, where if you wanted to buy some nice soy sauce, because a lot of the soy sauce factories that are down there are still in operation, and so you can go down there and buy some soy sauce, miso, different products, and then this place had 20 servings for lunch. That was it. They were like, if we get more than 20 people, lunch is closed.
So
which is
going home.
Just to give you an idea of how much traffic that area usually gets.
Yeah.
The other funny thing is that there were 20 servings of one dish, and so you either got the lunch special or you didn't get food. And it was aji, which is mackerel.
Yeah, horse mackerel.
Yeah, it's another thing. I didn't know that mackerel and horse mackerel are completely different fish.
I guess it's kind of like sardine, where sardine I think is like a type of fish. Like there are lots of fish that can be sardine. So I guess mackerel, same thing, I guess.
Because I was like, oh, saba I was like, oh yeah, I've had mackerel.
Aji is my favorite mackerel, horse mackerel, which maybe explains why sometimes I don't like saba as much.
Saba tastes completely different.
Yeah.
Saba's like a very fishy, like ocean smell tasting fish, and aji was like a richer, it was like richer but not as fishy tasting. So anyway, there was an aji set meal, and that's what you got. And if you didn't want it, that was all that was on the menu. And it came, you could pick big, medium, or small rice, and yeah.
Ono is also known for a festival in the summer.
Oh, we should go.
Yeah.
What's the festival?
Nice festival? I can't remember. It's like one of the lion dance festivals. That's like the purification ritual where they like slay the demon or whatever. But yeah, it's like a really nice area, so I want to go.
Yeah, apparently the soy sauce that's from Ono is milder and sweeter than like the average soy sauce. And apparently, I guess because this area is really humid, it's perfect for the fermentation process.
You know, I was reading about this today. You know what our average humidity is throughout the year?
No.
73%.
Nice.
Is our average humidity.
Well,
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wet out there right now.
It's humid. Yeah, I think January is one of the rainiest months.
Yeah,
it's
which
like
is
over
unfortunate.
10 inches of rain.
It snowed a little earlier and it was really pretty, but
Yeah.
anyway, we don't need to turn this into a weather podcast, but
well, do you have a word of the week?
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
So my word is datsuijo, and it means dressing room. And kind of means dressing room. So it literally means like the place you get undressed. And my friend was asking me, what do you call in English the room that's outside the shower? And I was like, I don't think we have a room other than bathroom. Like maybe changing room, dressing room. But it's interesting because a lot of bathrooms in Japan, in houses, like you'll have a toilet room and then you'll have a separate bath area where there's like a unit bath where it's a wet room where you slide the door open and there's a shower and a tub and you can like get the whole room wet. And when you step out of that room, you're in like a room that has a sink and maybe somewhere to put your clothes. Like ours just has a sink and our washing machine. And yeah, so I call that area the bathroom, but actually there's a toilet room and a bathroom, and in English, the only word we have is bathroom.
Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting.
Datsuijo.
Yeah. What's your word?
My word is fume.
Fume, like unclear.
Yeah, it means unknown.
Unknown.
So, yeah, just seemed like a fitting word.
Oh.
Unknowns out there.
The unknowns.
Yeah.
This word is interesting because, like, fu is, like, it means, like, not bright, like, not illuminated.
Like, I think literally translated, you would translate it as, like, not bright. But it means, like, unknown.
There's not enough to see what's going on.
Yeah, it's, like, hidden in shadows. But, yeah, just...
Do you feel some existential dread
I don't know, but just, like, thinking about, the students in Noto and their situation.
That's
like
true.
So much is just like up in the air. And so like who knows like where they'll go to school, like if their schools will reopen, like where they'll be living. I don't know. It just seemed very unknown. So yeah, it's my word.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening again this week.
Yeah.
And as always, if you have anything to add or any questions or you just want to say hi, you can email us ramblingramsbothams@gmail.com. You can also give us a review if you want to on one of the podcast sites that you listen to.
Send us an angry letter.
Yeah. If you send us an angry letter,
he
I might
said
cry.
liquefaction, but it's liquefaction. Sorry.
We already know that
we don't
dumb.
know. We're just simpletons.
Anyway,
but I'm getting cold. So.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening. We're gonna retreat into the only room that has the heater in it now. So we'll see you guys next week.
Yep. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.